Where do our ideals come from? Why do we believe in the things we believe in? Do these beliefs come from our parents? Do our beliefs come from our schools? Do they come from our friends? From our leaders? From the state? Think of something important to you. Something you hold dear, some particular issue which you believe in. Anything you care about, it doesn't matter what it is. When did you first start believing that? When did that belief become something you held? Do you remember who first told you that position, and when you first decided that it was what you believed in? For so many of us, our beliefs are what define us, what make us who we are. But where do those beliefs actually come from? Final Fantasy XIV is a game about beliefs. Belief has power in the world of Final Fantasy XIV, and there's no faction more powerful than the Garlean Empire. If you had told me that Garlemald would be my favorite zone of the expansion going into Endwalker, I'm not sure I would have believed you. It's not that I wasn't looking forward to the zone, it's just that we're going to the moon, going to a Charlian biodome, going to, India, going to the moon. Garlemald seemed pretty straightforward in comparison, and the Garlean Empire has never exactly been my favorite part of the world of Final Fantasy XIV. The Garleans have been a major part of the game from the very beginning, even before the extremely well-received relaunch of the game, A Realm Reborn. Once the weakest people in the world, the only race who were unable to use the magic that defined the way of life of the other peoples of the world. Slowly, year over year, they were pushed back out of their lands by those more powerful, foot by foot, until all they had left was the harsh frozen north of the continent of Ilsabard, which no one else thought livable, let alone wanted. Left by the rest of the world to die, they would instead become stronger, building a vast empire, technologically superior to every other nation in the world, and under the leadership of the Emperor Solus Zoscalvus. Take back what was theirs, and then more. The Garleans are, when you begin Final Fantasy XIV, a seemingly unstoppable force, with their eyes set on total domination of the world. Their sympathetic backstory does not forgive their crimes, however. The Garlean Empire is an explicitly fascistic force, and one that views no means unjustifiable to achieve their goal. They were the ones responsible for the summoning of the Lesser Moon of Dalamud, calling the ancient dragon Bahamut back from his prison and bringing the continent-spanning calamity which caused massive death and destruction, as well as causing the real-life relaunch of the game, seemingly, and the key word here is seemingly, to simply weaken the people of the continent of Eorzea for future invasions. The Garleans serve as the primary antagonistic force of A Realm Reborn's storyline, staging an invasion of the continent of Eorzea led by the legatus Gaius von Baelsar, though the Ascian death cult would eventually be revealed to be the puppet masters behind much of the events of the game by the end of that story, with one such Ascian, La Habrea, serving as the true final boss of the original scenario. Through all of this, though, they never amounted to much more than trite villains, at least in my eyes. Final Fantasy has always worn its Star Wars influence on its sleeve, something which has never bothered me, but never has it felt more apparent than with the Garleans, whose uniforms and leaders have that similar to, but legally distinct from, Stormtroopers and Darth Vader flavor. That wasn't a problem for me. It wasn't even really a complaint. MMOs as a genre aren't particularly well known for their storytelling. This was the hail and well met hero, go collect 15 boar pelts genre, so when I first came to Final Fantasy XIV, it wasn't for the storyline. It was because I'd heard it was a fun MMO my friends were playing. The fact that playing through the story felt even presentationally akin to playing a real, single-player JRPG was remarkable, impressive even. There were genuine twists, and even moments of genuine pathos at the end of A Realm Reborn, such as the infinitely memified
Such devastation! This was not my intention!
That was, itself, more than enough. Though the Garleans would appear as more secondary antagonists of Final Fantasy XIV's first expansion, Heavensward, they would truly take center stage again with the second expansion, Stormblood. Stormblood begins with the player character, along with the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, characters taking the role of the traditional Final Fantasy party, adventuring into the nation of Garlemald. Garlemald is a nation which has been under the rule of the Garlean Empire for decades, with many of the characters you've gotten to know over the course of A Realm Reborn and Heavensward being refugees from Garlemald, and in particular, the capital city of Alamigo, with one notable area in Ul'dah, a desert nation that accepted many of these refugees, even being called Little Alamigo. I'm glossing over a lot of things here about how we got to the point of pressing into a hostile nation, up to and including a fight between a dragon and a giant robot, but it's not actually that important to what we're talking about here, so I'm just going to assure you that it's very cool. The Eorzean Alliance, forces from Ul'dah, Limsa, Gridania, and Ishgard, all nations which have individually been threatened or directly invaded by Garlean forces, send the Scions into Garlemald to make contact with the resistance movement there, that they might finally push back against the Empire's borders for the first time in decades. It feels like something has genuinely changed. Stormblood released in 2017, and at this point players had been defending against the aggression of Garlemald for 7 years, if they'd been playing since the launch of the original. 4 years, if they'd been playing since A Realm Reborn. And at the very least, easily a couple hundred hours if they'd only played the storylines of A Realm Reborn and Heavensward. The breach of Baelsar's Wall and pressing into Garlean territory put the Empire on the defensive for the first time ever. It goes badly. Within a few hours and only a couple of levels, the forces of the Resistance are largely rebuffed, and the Eorzean Alliance's invasion into Garlemald is an utter failure before it truly begins, with the ultimate deciding factor being a personal visit from the Crown Prince of Garlemald, Xenos Yegalvis, a fighter far more formidable than anything you've faced so far in the game, and seemingly an unstoppable one-man army. The only thing a direct push to reclaim Alamigo is going to achieve is weakening the forces of Eorzea, which will eventually only yield Garlemald more ground. It is time for a change of plans. Eorzea is not the only continent which Garlemald has invaded over the previous decades. Far across the sea, to the distant east, is the continent of Othard, and the nation of Doma, which has been under complete Garlean occupation for 25 years. A full army being sent to Doma to attempt to reclaim it would almost certainly result in total failure, and the Eorzean Alliance don't have the resources to send that far east in the first place. Instead, you and a few of the Scions carefully infiltrate Othard to attempt to rally the people of Doma to rise up against their oppressors. If they can force Garlemald to split their own forces into fighting a war on two very different fronts, and if they can sow discord and rebellion among the people of Doma itself, then they just might be able to gain actual ground in Garlemald. There's just one problem. The people of Doma are not interested in being liberated. The people of Doma have been under the yoke of the Garlean Empire for 2.5 decades. There are grown adults with families and children of their own who have never known a life other than that under the Empire, and the Empire is not forgiving. It's not that life under the Garlean Empire is beneficial to most of those living in these subjugated nations. I referred to Garlemald as being an explicitly fascistic force earlier, and here is where we see what that actually means. Garlemald don't keep such a massive intercontinental empire under control strictly through their military force. That would be an impossible task, even for their considerable force.
Do you know the most reliable way to deal with those who stubbornly refuse to see reason? You conquer them. Crush them under heel. Such was the trusted method of Alak, and one still favored by Garlemald. But conquest is the easy part. The true challenge begins once the dust has settled, quenching the glowing embers of animosity and maintaining a semblance of peace.
Rather, they keep the people of these subjugated nations in check the same way many real-life totalitarian regimes do, through both the carrot and the stick. As you travel through Othard, you quickly realize that people are frightened to even be seen near you, let alone speak with you, let alone rally against the Empire. Resistance is not taken lightly, and if you get out of line against Garlemald, they're not only going to kill you, they're going to kill your family, your friends, and maybe your friends' families too if the mood strikes them. That kind of rule through despair is powerful, but on its own, it's not enough to keep people working against their own best interests, either. This is where Stormblood deals with a rare topic few other games touch. In fact, I can count on one finger the number of other games which deal with this topic. Collaborators. There are plenty of young people in Doma and Garabania who are more than happy to work with the Garlean forces. Those who join the Legion, those who report on their friends, these people see rewards, if only small ones. Most of those who cooperate see lives only marginally better than the rest of those under the Empire's heel. But a few lucky individuals are even given genuine power, as it's easier to control Doma with a child of Doma than it is with someone who is clearly Garlean.
Line them up. Kill one for every question he refuses to answer.
The official state religion of Garlemald is atheism. Belief has power in the world of Final Fantasy XIV, quite literally. Believing in things makes them real, summoning physical manifestations of those gods into the world as powerful beings called primals, or as the Garleans call them, icons. Primals subject those nearby them to tempering, essentially a form of mind control that turns people around them into mindless servants. This is a form of magic that the Garleans find especially terrifying, and the only one which even their own people can perform. No gods to worship, no icons to summon. That means that under Garlean rule, the people of Doma and Garabania have been forbidden from practicing their unique faiths, a practice that has robbed them of their own cultural identity. Even these factors cannot keep the people down forever, though, and through the course of your campaign into Doma, you are able to meet the small resistance that still exists, rally the people of Doma behind their rightful leadership, and deal a major blow to Garlemald, culminating in a siege of Doma Castle, giving Doma back to the people of Doma, and forcing the Empire out. What's more, your plan works. Garlemald's forces are split, giving you enough of an edge to make a second push into Garabania, first claiming a major Garlean military base, and then eventually pushing your way into Alamigo itself and reclaiming it, pushing Garlemald out of their only prominent foothold on the Eorzean continent. But one of the things I love about Final Fantasy XIV is that isn't where the game ends. Because of the way 14 is an ongoing narrative, progressing in mostly real time, it gets the chance to keep exploring what happens to Garabania beyond the climactic battle to reclaim the capital. For example, in the game there's a massive iron fortress near where you first enter Garabania, used to control movements of civilians through the country and keep track of people. And it is a distinctly Garlean piece of construction, clashing with not only the other architecture of the area, but with the very geography it is placed in. A few patches into Stormblood, the native Lamia tribe of the area were introduced as a new reputation faction, with a storyline about reclaiming this large, now abandoned fortress, and using it for the people of Garabania. By completing this quest chain, doing small tasks and chores like washing clothes in the nearby stream or flattening some of the iron plates of the fortress so they can be reused for a better purpose, you slowly, over the course of several real-time weeks or months, turn the once hostile fortress into a bustling hub of the region. It now feels like home, and more like a part of the nation it exists in. Where there were once tanks and soldiers, now there are stables and storefronts. Garabanian tapestries and statues decorate, and the people have made this place a part of them, too. The truth is, none of the people of Garabania nor Doma will be able to truly return to how things used to be. These imperial occupations were traumatic events, lasting for decades on a national level. Brothers killed and betrayed brothers, families were torn apart, some unlucky few were taken from their families and conscripted by force into either the Legion or into the fuel mines far north in Garlemald. That sort of trauma isn't something that goes away, even if the invaders are eventually pushed back. The occupation is a part of these nations' identities, now and forever. It's a part of who they are, but it's not something they can't move forward from, becoming stronger because of. That's something you see happen literally in this quest chain. It might be silly. I'm talking about a daily hub where you can help a bunch of snake ladies wash stinky clothes and ride elephants so you can eventually get an elephant of your own to ride around on. But this is the kind of thing that simply can't be done in any other medium. Even in other games, this would be considered boring and distracting. But because it's an MMO, a real-time narrative, spending some downtime after freeing Garlemald to actually help the people of that nation turn this monument to their own subjugation into something that helps the people recover, not to mention getting a sick elephant mount out of it, is actually a positive. Visiting this fortress now, at least in my game where I've finished this whole quest chain, it's a home to the people of Garlemald, a place that brought them all together, decorated with items of significance to this very specific culture, a culture that the Garleans tried to wipe out. This is something the player was responsible for, not only narratively, but ludically. I think that's really beautiful. I've spent a lot of time now discussing Garlemald as a nation, and the people of other nations who are subjugated by Garlemald. But now let's focus on some of the specific people of Garlemald, specifically the leaders. Zenos Yghelves, Crown Prince of the Empire, serves as the primary villain of Stormblood. Zenos embodies a sort of nihilistic hedonism. Not a sexual or gluttonous hedonism, but a violent one. You know that anime trope about the guy who just wants to fight? The Goku-type figure who is just looking for the next great battle because fighting an evenly matched opponent is the greatest thrill in the world? Zenos is that sort of character, but he's reached a level of combat prowess that means no one in the world can stand against him. No one but the player character, that is. By the end of Stormblood, you are able to fight Zenos one-on-one, and this monster, who doesn't care about his own people, civilian or soldier, who seemingly doesn't think anything matters, comes to consider you his only friend in the world, specifically because you're the only one who can make him feel anything. Solus Zoscalves, Zenos' great-grandfather and one of the primary villains of the original Final Fantasy XIV, is the original emperor who brought Garlemald to power. He is viewed with unparalleled respect by the people of Garlemald, and unparalleled fear by everyone else. He is the one who took a broken, frozen people on the verge of death and built the strongest empire on the planet. He's passed into the realm of legends. He's also an elaborate lie. Late in the Stormblood expansion's patch content, you meet Emperor Solus Zoscalves. Not the old man the world knew, but the young Solus Zoscalves, reborn as he once was. Soon, you learn the truth. Emperor Solus was never human, or Garlean, rather. He was, in fact, Emet-Selch, one of the Ascians, an immortal race who worship the ancient god Zodiark, and seek to bring him back to life through the death and destruction and sacrifice of countless souls. This is why Solus was responsible for the summoning of Dalamud and the rebirth of Bahamut at the end of the original 14. This is the true reason Garlemald has been waging bloody war across the planet. This is the true purpose behind their imperialism and total domination. There's a lot more going on with both Zenos and especially Emet-Selch, my favorite character in the game, and my favorite character in the Final Fantasy franchise.
You're plotting something.
Every hour of every day. But never you mind about that. As I have told you 1,000 times before, I like to watch. Nothing more.
But they're actually topics for videos of their own, and I don't want to derail this by talking about how Emet-Selch's final moments make me cry, okay? But, let me know if you'd be interested in more Final Fantasy XIV videos talking about Zenos or Emet-Selch, maybe some other things. If people are interested, I might just make those videos, and if people aren't interested, I'm probably going to make them anyway because I'm a force of chaotic neutral.
But yes, moral relativism and all that. Case in point, I do not consider you to be truly alive, ergo I will not be guilty of murder if I kill you.
The person in charge of the Empire during the events of Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn onwards, is Varus Zoscalves, the grandson of Solus Zoscalves. Towards the end of Stormblood's patch content, you're given a chance to meet Varus face to face, along with other representatives of the Eorzean Alliance. The major blow dealt by the loss of 2 conquered nations has the Empire desperate enough to agree to peace talks. They go badly, however, when Varys explains exactly what his beliefs, and by proxy the beliefs of Garlemald as a state, truly are. Varys seeks only to unite the entire world under a single banner. As long as there is difference, there will be discord.
Divided, you sow this fertile soil with the seeds of your differences and reap naught but discord and chaos for your trouble. Eorzea must be united under one leader, one purpose. I would offer you both and bring an end to your strife.
With all due respect, Your Radiance, the only thing that you offered the people of Alamigo was fear and hopelessness.
The citizens of Dorma can also attest to the meager arms of imperial rule. There is no purpose to be found in a life of oppression, each day more uncertain than the last.
Our people are willing to die for their freedom. A great many already have, and countless more will, if we don't put an end to this madness here and now.
We brought order and stability to your lives. This madness and bloodshed is of your own making. You broke the peace, not Garlemald.
The reason Garlemald sought to wipe out the native cultures of the lands they occupied is because Varys believes there must be only one culture. He also truly believes that Garlemald has not invaded these other lands, merely taken back the land they were driven from so long ago.
I will concede that after centuries of exile, reclamation may be mistaken for invasion. Nevertheless, it is not. And those who till stolen soil have no right to object when cast out in turn.
One by one, the leaders of Eorzea bring arguments before Varys, and in turn he eloquently refutes them with an irreconcilable difference in perspective.
I came here in the hope of finding some speck of common ground, but I see now these discussions will accomplish nothing. Despite what you people may believe, I am not wont to choose the sword over the olive branch. 'Tis but a pity men are loath to accept one without first being shown the other.
But most important are the true goals which Varys and the Empire inherited from his grandfather.
When you put it like that, it all starts to sound like an excuse, doesn't it? But to distract from what? Why are you really waging this war?
Finally, you ask the right question. I can but hope you heed mine answer and at last accept the righteousness of our cause. My goal is this: to return the world to the way it once was, the way it was always meant to be. In doing so, mankind will be made whole once more. No longer will we suffer from the dissension born of our differences. There will be but one race, a perfect race, as we were when time began.
He's a follower of his grandfather's vision, to usher in calamity after calamity to awaken Zodiark, and reunite broken shards of the ancient world, believing, as the Ossian death cult do, that after 13 such calamities, those strong enough to survive will be reborn as a perfect, immortal race. The summoning of Dalamud and Bahamut was one such calamity, the 7th in the history of the world, and Garlemald is already working to bring about an 8th. What's more, he believes race itself to be an imperfection, brought about by the sundering of the original race's souls, that there was once an immortal, perfect race, and that when the original calamity sundered the world, it split mankind apart into various lesser races. It is worth noting, however, that Varus isn't a fan of the Ascians either.
The founding father was an Ascian, and he created the Empire solely for the purpose of sowing the seeds of chaos. Don't take it personally. I merely do my duty.
You fiends are overfond of your own voices. Mark me, Ascian. Man is the master of his own destiny.
Such a waste of time and energy. Both yours and mine.
He wants to be rid of them too, but believes only when man is reunited and brought back to his further glory will such a thing be possible. With an understanding of what Varus believes, and the resolve with which he believes it, it becomes clear that no peace with Garlemald is possible, that no such peace will ever be possible. There are some beliefs that are too toxic to overlook, some differences in ideology which cannot be overcome. So now we've talked about the first Emperor, the current Emperor, and the next Emperor, and we've seen that the corruption of Garlemald goes all the way to the top. The people in charge of this vast empire are not only violent, but believe their violence to be morally imperative.
You all in your own way have proven as much today. The peace you seek is but a fleeting solution to a fundamental problem. One which calls for more drastic measures. To bring about everlasting peace, our worlds must be rejoined. That is the goal the Empire would see realized. The glorious future unto which we shall one day shepherd mankind.
These people represent Garlemald at its worst. But there's one more Garlean leader I want to discuss. Legatus Gaius von Baelsar. Legatus Gaius serves as one of the primary antagonists of A Realm Reborn, a prominent military leader leading the invasion efforts into Garlemald. Unlike the emperors and prince we've talked about so far, Gaius is a true believer in Garlemald. He loves his nation, believes in their stated values, and not the real values secretly kept by those at the top. He would do anything for Garlemald and her people. None of this excuses Gaius. The man is a monster, a war criminal responsible for much of the pain being inflicted upon innocents. Baelsar's Wall, the wall keeping the people of Garabania in the nation and the people of Eorzea out, is named for him after all. But as memeable as it is when Gaius says,
Such devastation! This was not my intention!
At the end of the Praetorium, as the Ultima weapon he's been responsible for building is turned on for the first time, the thing which will lead Garlemald into a new golden age and let them conquer Eorzea, but which is actually intended to cause massive violence on the same level as another calamity, and he sees the destruction it causes firsthand, utterly destroying the massive Garlean fortress the scene is set in. It's an honest reaction. Gaius is a true believer in a fascistic culture. That doesn't excuse what he does, but it does evoke sympathy. When he says,
Such devastation! This was not my intention!
It's a crisis of faith. Not faith in a religion, but faith in the very culture he's believed in with an equally religious fervor for his entire life. Gaius carries the weight of his actions forward. Learning of the Ascian puppet masters he had truly been serving all along, his faith in his nation is broken, and he sees with clarity what it has all truly been for the first time. He is believed dead for years, but you come across him once again in the lead-up to the Shadowbringers expansion, where it turns out that rather than dying at the Praetorium, he deserted the Garlean forces and became what amounts to a wandering Ronin samurai, wandering the earth, hunting Ossians, fighting the Garlean forces and the Eorzean forces alike when necessary to protect the actual people he thought he was protecting all along. He becomes an ally, not a friend. He's never forgiven by the people of Eorzea, but he is accepted. He knows he can never redeem himself for what he's done, but he keeps trying to do the right thing anyway, because it's not about redemption. It's not about his pride or his legacy. It's about helping those he can. There are no scales that weigh the good and bad actions he's done. And even if the people he's hurt will always be in greater number than the people he's helped, that doesn't make the help he does now less real or less true. One more life protected still counts. There are so many other characters I could talk about here. Cid Garland, whose family were known as the greatest engineers of the Empire, and who himself worked for them for years before defecting because he didn't want to make instruments used to hurt people any longer. Nero Tolskeva, who spent years as the chief engineer of Garlemald and who was still always measured in comparison to the great feats of the Garlands, growing to hate Cid as a villain of A Realm Reborn before ultimately putting his differences aside and working side by side with Cid to save the world against Omega in Stormblood. Lucia Junius, a Garlean spy sent to the isolationist nation of Ishgard to infiltrate them, and making it all the way to a high level of their military before realizing she had truly come to love the people of Ishgard, and had become a part of that nation, and defending Ishgard against the invasion efforts she had been sent there to set the stage for. These are the people of Garlemald. All of them love Garlemald, all of them love the nation, but all of them realize that those in power are an evil that need to be purged. Good people can exist in a terrible system, the same way bad people can exist in a good one.
They're just people. No different from you or I. They've got their share of liars and murderers, but so do we. So do we all.
Sometimes there are good people who do terrible things because they've come to believe in the system they've grown up in. Sometimes you have violent serial killers masquerading as military leaders or scientists. That's what's so amazing about Garlemald, what it comes to represent by the end of Stormblood. On a surface level, they're just an evil empire. Remember, these are the same people who started as a stand-in for the Empire of Star Wars. Can you name me a single member of the Empire in the Star Wars films with the level of nuance of Gaius or Lucia, whose name isn't Darth Vader? Of course not. Because a 2-hour film, or even 3 2-hour films, 6 2-hour films, 9 2-hour films, don't have the time to tell you about the rich internal lives of Imperial Leader Number 8, nor should they. Films have to be economical with their time. Video games are, on average, the longest form of entertainment we engage with. MMOs are the longest video games, and the only ones that progress in something resembling real time. Final Fantasy XIV here uses that strength for things like this. So when I tell people it's hard to get into Final Fantasy XIV, the storyline alone took me 300 hours by the time I had finished Shadowbringers, and it only gets longer with every patch and every expansion. But it's worth it. This is what I mean. This is what Final Fantasy XIV does better than any game I've ever played. Maybe better than any piece of media I've ever seen. And all of this would pay off in Endwalker, when we finally set foot in Garlemald. By the end of Stormblood, I was prepared for the storyline to go to Garlemald. It seemed the natural place to proceed after liberating 2 of the main nations they had conquered, leading the Eorzean alliance, now with new allies from Girabania and the Far East, into the heart of darkness. Instead, we got Shadowbringers, my favorite Final Fantasy game ever made, and maybe the best JRPG of all time. Shadowbringers had very little to do with Garlemald. Okay, that's not totally true. There's still a B-plot about Garlemald using chemical weapons to murder their enemies, trying to cause an 8th calamity. Shadowbringers is the Emmett Selk expansion, where you learn such intimate details about who the founder of Garlemald is, and what his motivations truly are. Plus, you've got the entire optional storyline about the Empire unleashing the Ruby, Emerald, and Diamond weapons, which I'm going to come clean with you, I haven't played because I'm a filthy casual fake gamer girl, and the entire Bosgen Front optional storyline about the forces you allied with in Girabania and the Far East, helping reclaim another nation that's been all but destroyed by the Garleans. But none of this is really what Shadowbringers is about. Even through the patch content, dealing with Elidibus inspiring a new generation of warriors of light, using the very myth you've built up to nefarious ends, Garlemald is kind of on the back burner. At the end of Shadowbringers, long before Endwalker begins, Emperor Varus is assassinated. Xenos returns from the dead, only to kill his father, not to assume the throne himself, but to destabilize Garlemald. It works. Varus's chief political rival uses the Emperor's assassination in order to attempt to wrest control of Garlemald, while a loyalist faction of the Empire claims that this rival was himself behind the assassination to claim the throne for himself. This leads to a civil war that ravages Garlemald, with each of the nation's legions choosing their own sides, and their own loyalties. This war brings Garlemald to the brink of destruction, a destruction that was finalized by one of the last remaining Ossians, Fandaniel, and Xenos working together as a new faction called the Telophoroi, who seek to summon lunar primals and cause destruction not to create a perfect world, but to bring about the end, embracing nihilism and oblivion. Seeing the weakness in Garlemald's political turmoil, the Telophoroi use it as their base of operations. They summon a massive tower and a powerful primal, which unleashes a final wave of destruction, reducing the city of Garlemald to rubble, and bringing most of the surviving Garleans under their thrall, tempering the soldiers of Garlemald from both sides of the civil war. This is the setting for your entrance into Garlemald, not as an invading force, not even as a small, desperate team to defeat the Empire, but as a relief effort. The Ilsabard contingent, as they declare themselves, are made up of military forces from every nation you've ever worked with. Gridania, Limsa Laminsa, Ul'dah, Alamigo, Ishgard, Bosja, Doma, and more. Even Garlean defectors, who have chosen to return to their homeland knowing how hated they'll be, just that they might help the innocents living there. Before you go into Garlemald, you're treated to this cutscene introducing all the characters you'll be traveling into Garlemald with, and it's nearly a half hour of reintroducing familiar faces, all of whom have reason aplenty to hate the Empire, many of which have lived under Garlean oppression, here to go and rescue her people, bringing medicine, food, fuel, and supplies, and hopefully managing to defeat the Telophoroi and restore some stability to the land. Even Gaius is there, although he knows he cannot accompany you, as his very presence might cause conflict, either because he is hated as a traitor, or because he might be heralded as a savior, there to claim the throne himself, and cause more problems. These are people who have put aside what Garlemald has done to them, to each of them personally, so that they might help the people hurting there. There's even a line acknowledging this, as it is mentioned that for every person who decided to join the group, far more rejected them outright.
Dalmasca, Bosnia, Alamigo, all lands which have suffered the tyranny of the Empire. I would never presume to question your motives. Nevertheless, I must reiterate that our goal is to aid the victims of the Telophoroi, the common folk of Garlemald. And they are victims, make no mistake, though I understand that many may struggle to see them as such.
You're more right than you know. For every one of us that answered the call, there were a dozen that refused.
The only problem is that the people of Garlemald do not want your help.
So cold and unforgiving. Thus spoke Emperor Solus as he gazed upon his barren domain. 800 years it had been since the Garleans first set foot here. Bested by the Kovosi after centuries of war and driven from fertile southern pastures into the blasted northern wastes. In the year 1513 of the 6th Astral Era,
a young legatus named Solace single-handedly sparked the Magitech Revolution. Taking in the capital with his eyes for the first time, I recall thinking to myself, far colder on the earth than in the heavens. Yes, far colder indeed. Bitterly so.
When you finally make it to Garlemald, it quickly becomes apparent just how bad things are. Seeing the devastation that's been brought upon the capital city, the question quickly becomes not where the survivors can be found, but whether there are survivors to find at all. After spending some time fighting the Tempered Soldiers and establishing a foothold at an abandoned Garlean settlement, which you name Camp Broken Glass, you see a civilian watching you from the distance, and you and two of the other Scions, characters named Alice and Alphino, who I've personally taken to calling the Wonder Twins, follow her back to her home, where you find a handful of surviving civilians. You provide the refugees with medicine, and spend a moment talking with them and listening to the radio. A station which has been playing their national anthem, Home Beyond the Horizon, on repeat. Home beyond the horizon, they say, is a reminder of what they hope to reclaim. Though they were pushed to the frozen north, one day they'll reclaim the homeland that is rightfully theirs. The bad blood between Garlemald and the rest of the world runs deep. They refer to you as savages, and tell you repeatedly that they don't need your help. When you tell them that you have a cure for tempering, they reject it, saying the last thing they need is to be helped with the same magic used to force them out of their homeland so long ago. Perhaps all of this is to be expected, but what's stranger is when they discuss conspiracy theories, that Emperor Varus was never actually killed, and that he staged his own assassination in order to flush out traitors, and that soon he'll return to bring the Empire back to glory. One of them even insists that he heard Emperor Varus's voice on the radio just before the people of Garlemald were tempered. There's a more pressing problem than politics, however. These refugees' heaters have run out of fuel, and the harsh Garlean cold will take their lives if they don't get them up and running again soon. However, let's be generous and call them conscripts, who spent their lives in the mines before the Civil War, are taking all of the fuel for themselves, and for some reason that the refugees don't understand, they're not willing to give fuel to the people who they see as responsible for them being taken from their occupied homelands by force. The workers who are responsible for the fuel supply are actually thrilled to see Eorzean forces. Many of them were from the lands that are now represented by these forces, like Bosja or Girabania, and are more than willing to cooperate with your forces and give supplies that will get Camp Broken Glass's heaters back up and running, bringing safety to your people. They're less enthused about the idea of giving supplies to Garlean civilians, however, which takes some extra convincing. But eventually, you're able to get just enough supplies to keep the refugees safe for now. Notably, while these other refugees are glad to see friendly faces and happy to cooperate with you, they also say that they have no intention of leaving Garlemald with your group. Some of them have lived here most of their lives, and as awful as the treatment of the Garleans was, they have come to consider this place home, too. When you return to the camp, you find that the refugees have attempted to ambush and attack Alphino, who is at this point 4 MMO expansions deep and about level 82, so has easily dispatched these level 12 civilians. While he was handling them, however, The girl who you initially followed to the refugees' encampment and her sister have fled, believing that the Eorzean invasion was there to use magic to mind control and enslave them while the Empire is weak. The girl and her deathly ill younger sister wander out into the snow, completely unprepared, and are immediately killed by wildlife. So the relief efforts are going great. Alphino, and especially Alice, feel truly shaken at this point. After assuring the Garleans that they were only there to help, and doing everything in their power to gain their trust, they've only made things worse, hurting and even accidentally killing the civilians they came to save. Civilians who have been told stories of the dangerous savages to the south their entire lives, and whose paranoia of foreigners runs deep.
I should have... We can't leave them like this. We have to take them home.
What if we're only making it worse?
Maybe we don't belong here, but neither do they. Not out here in the wind and the cold.
So you've got a foothold with fuel, medicine, and supplies up and running, but contact with the locals could be going better. Before you're able to regroup and figure out what your next steps are, some of the guards from your camp announce that they've captured an untempered Garlean soldier, trying to steal supplies from your group.
Garleans? Traitors to your homeland! Have you no shame?
I am Lucia Junius, a Temple Knight of Ishgard. And you are?
Iulus Pier Norbanus. And that's all you invaders will get from me.
He gives you his name, Iulus, but nothing else, calling you an invasion force there to take Garlemald over while they are weakened. He agrees to lead a diplomatic party back to the surviving Garlean forces' base, but no more than 3 people. The first and most obvious choice to send is the champion of Eorzea, the player character. No one is stronger nor more respected the world over after 4 expansions than they are. The Wonder Twins, Alice and Alphino, immediately insist that they be the other 2 sent with you, adamant that if they can speak to the leadership, they'll be able to convince them of the Ilsabard contingent's earnest desire to help the people suffering here.
We have seen with our own eyes the hardships the Garleans face, how their futures and lives hang in the balance.
It's not the warmest invitation, but it's an opportunity to prove our intentions true. Maybe not a chance to make things right, but a chance to make them better.
It's agreed that the 3 of you will go with Iulus, and you head out. On your way there, you pass many tempered Garleans. Unlike your own forces, who have been careful not to lethally harm any of the tempered, Iulus holds no reservations about killing them. Garlemald has no way of bringing tempered back to their old selves, and so once someone is tempered, they're no longer considered Garlean. When told you have a cure for tempering, he snips back. Why should he believe your cure wouldn't just replace the Icon's mind control with your own? Eventually you come across some soldiers whose tempering had progressed far enough that they had mutated into terrible beasts. Iulus asks if you still think they can be cured, and Alphino admits that once the tempering has progressed to this point, they haven't successfully brought them back, which Iulus smugly takes as confirmation of the cure's non-existence. Eventually, you're led to the Garlean base, Tertium, an abandoned subway tunnel where the Garlean 1st Legion, along with a few scattered civilians, are holed up. What you find isn't a strong military resistance, but a few half-dead men struggling to stay alive. These soldiers were already recovering from a vicious fight with another legion in the streets of Garlemald, when the wave of tempering claimed most of the city. Now they have no supplies, no fuel, no food, no medicine. These are very desperate men and women, just trying to hold on as long as they can. Soon you meet the commander of the legion, one of the few surviving legates.
Lord Quintus Vankina, legatus of the First Legion.
The first? I had no idea you had survived.
We lost our emperor, our city, more than half our troops. For my wounds, I may never take the field again. But we survived, aye. In a manner much to your liking, I dare say.
Alice and Elfino try to convince him that you're there on a genuine relief effort. We only want to help. Please, let us help. Quintus tells you that he believes you may be there in good faith, but knows whatever your motivations may be, it's your leaders he doesn't trust. If he accepts your help now, then that would be the end of Garlemald.
But regardless of the ideals you espouse, your leaders would not send an army into Garlemald if they did not stand to benefit. If we accept their aid, they will expect their efforts to be rewarded once the Telophoroi are no longer a threat. And after compensation and concessions, the great empire would be brought to heel. Her enemies rejoice at her downfall. Our third eye, a mark of shame.
Alice fires back, calling this paranoia, essentially, as Quintus and the other Garleans seem to have a self-centered belief that the entire world only seeks to make them suffer and pay for all of the things they've done.
What I'm trying to say is, there are so many people who just don't care about making you suffer. And maybe that's almost insulting after all the suffering you feel the world has subjected your people to, but believe it or not, that's the truth. And now we're here, and all we're asking is for you to tell us what you want, what you hope for.
Quintus almost laughs at this, and asks Alice,
if a world without conflict is your desire, why reject the unity and prosperity of Garlemald? Is it because we do not share your faith? That we do not share your heritage? That our ideals and virtues differ? That we cherish and hold in the highest that which you do not? Disparity is the root of discord, and peace built on compromise is flawed and fleeting. Happiness for one and all is a dream, and the reality is that to the victor go the spoils. That is why we Garleans will never submit nor surrender. For freedom and for pride, we will remain true to ourselves until the bitter end. That is my hope.
To Alice, Alphino, and the player, the actions of Garlemald as a nation are repulsive. Garlemald entered nations, oppressed their people, and erased their cultural identity. We've seen in places like Doma and Garabania that this is effective. Within just one generation, many of the youth in these nations had given up on their own culture for a chance to be accepted, for a chance at even a marginally better life as Garleans, even if they will always be second-class citizens. While that might be disgusting, it's also a form of unity, echoing the beliefs of Varus. It's the appeal of fascism, to give yourself over to a state and let a system make the decision of who you are. Everyone serves their role, as part of one greater whole. Some people might get stepped on, but only those whose role was to be stepped on. And if only everyone agreed to be a part of this same system, this homogenized culture, then perhaps things would work for everyone. To someone like Quintus, who was born in this system, spent decades taking part in it and reaping the benefits of it, it's clear that this is true. That if only they can take over everything until there is no more dissent, then everyone would see that he and the people he believes in were right all along. This empire, like every empire that's ever existed, is built upon belief. Not religious belief, but beliefs which are held every bit as strongly. The citizens believe that their military is infallible, and will protect them. The men of that military, like Iulus, believe that their leaders are infallible, and have a greater plan. The military leaders, like Legatus Quintus or Legatus Gaius, believe in the state, believe in the system, and believe in the royalty. Even the emperors, as corrupt as we've seen them to be, believe in a higher purpose, a glorious destiny which only they can bring about. That sort of belief is hard to fight, hard to reason with. When Quintus says all of these things, he and Alice both realize that reaching a mutual understanding will never be possible. Everything Quintus truly thinks is right, every value he's spent his entire life learning to hold, is counter to everything Alice believes in, everything she's chosen to make a stand for throughout the game, throughout the past real-life decade of story. Quintus orders the three of you to be kept in the camp as guests, with shock collars being fixed to Alice and Alphino. And though Quintus knows the champion of Eorzea wouldn't be so easily controlled, he also knows you wouldn't step out of line if it threatened your companions. You're given permission to wander the encampment and talk to soldiers and civilians there, and Iulus is put in charge of keeping you in line, while Quintus decides what he's going to do with you. You try to speak with the people of the camp. You try to convince them that you're here to help, and they're having none of it. None of them, soldier and civilian alike, trust you. Although they're cold, sick, and starving, you soon realize they believe help is coming, and coming soon. They think that the 10th Legion are returning from overseas, still as strong as they left and untouched by the effects of the Civil War and the Telophorois' attack. And if they can just hold out a little longer, the 10th Legion will save them. You try to find out what would actually help these people, and soon learn that, like the civilians you found outside the city, these people are out of fuel. The heaters have stopped working, and even though the subway tunnel is somewhat protected from the elements, they still need fuel to get their heaters back up and running if they're going to hold out any longer at all. Iulus takes the three of you out of the tunnels into the ruined city streets, in order to scavenge for fuel. First, you go to a park, trying to find the fuel that ran streetlights, ran heaters, and so on. Though Iulus has come here scavenging several times, and believes there's no fuel left to find, you all look, coming up empty. You all take a break near a pond that's now mostly frozen muck. Iulus shares a memory of coming here with his younger siblings, that they used to love playing in the heated pond and getting warm, even though it meant walking home soaking wet in the Garlean cold. It's a nice memory, and a moment of Iulus opening up to you, though he still doubts your intentions. Realizing that the pond used to be heated, Alice asks if they scavenged for fuel in the heaters for this pond. Iulus says he doubts it, as the heater was at the bottom of the pond, and diving into the frozen muck to try to retrieve a canister would end up killing whoever did so. Alice and the player take this as a sign of hope, diving into the pond. As a side note, the pond does damage to you as you wade through it due to the cold, which I think is a nice touch. Eventually you find the fuel canister, and Alice starts a fire to get the two of you warm once again. It's one partially depleted canister of fuel. It's not much at all. And yet, it's hope, and it's something none of you had to do. It's a gesture of good faith to help these people who are suffering, toward people who are holding you prisoner. Iulus, in this moment, starts to believe in you. You continue to scavenge for fuel, this time looking through ruined Magitech armor, essentially tanks which were being used during skirmishes during the Civil War. Much like before, it seems like a nearly lost cause. You're given 2 bombs at a time by Iulus to blow the plating off of the Magitech armor to check their fuel tanks, stressing to check the fuel gauge first before wasting a bomb. And I think it was the 5th armor I actually chose to blow, believing it might have some fuel left, before actually finding a tank that was partially full. When you run back to Iulus to get more bombs, he says, "I have plenty of these today, but tomorrow might be another story," reminding you just how limited supplies are. You keep scavenging, and after a short cutscene where you make quick and quiet contact with the forces from Camp Broken Glass, who let you know that you aren't actually trapped and that they're prepared to extract you when necessary, Iulus decides to head back. Now believing in you, if only slightly, Iulus takes the words about being given supplies and aid with no strings attached to heart, and actually tries to ask Quintus to accept the help. Quintus refuses, and orders the small bit of fuel you've gathered to be used to refill the remaining Magitech armor. Iulus asks about the heaters, and Quintus tells him not to question the plan, and that it's almost time to see everything come to fruition. Quintus then announces that he's decided what to do about the three of you. He places Alice and Alphino in chains, and orders that you return to Camp Broken Glass. Alice and Alphino are no longer guests, but hostages, and the Ilsabard contingent are to leave Camp Broken Glass immediately, leaving all of their supplies behind. If you do not leave all of your food, fuel, and other supplies behind, if you do not leave behind an airship, Alice and Alphino will be killed. If their conditions are met, Alice and Alphino will be sent back to Eorzea sometime after, on the airship which was left behind. Before you leave with Iulus escorting you back to the camp, though, Quintus tells you to go instruct 2 of the civilians in the camp to ask the ill for further instructions. When you do this, the civilians are shocked and distressed, before saying that they'll do so for Garlemald. It quickly becomes clear what is going on here. They've just taken 2 prisoners, and do not have the rations to keep 2 valuable prisoners alive. And so these 2 civilians who are less valuable than the prisoners are being ordered to leave camp, march into the harsh weather and dangerous streets, and die. The 2 of you make your way back to Camp Broken Glass. You pass Iulus's family home on the way back, and he confides in you what happened shortly after the tempering began.
This is my home. Our home. At least it was until that night. I was with Lord Quintus when the capital fell, and thus spared. My family, who did not own a radio, were less fortunate. When dawn came, I made my way here. My parents, my little brother and sister, they were still inside. But they weren't themselves, and they tried to. And I had to. I'd promised to take them away from the capital that very morning, to somewhere safe, to hide until the fighting stopped. I promised. The Garlean flag bears a chain, the bonds between our countrymen. A red link at its center, the blood of the fallen. Our loved ones who lived and died for Garlemald. But if she too fell, who would be left to remember them and their sacrifice? What enduring proof would there be that they were ever here? If we had turned to your gods, would they have saved us? I'm sorry, forget I spoke.
This new context makes you understand his insistence that no cure for tempering could possibly exist. When you get back to Camp Broken Glass, you tell Lucia and the others what the First Legion are demanding, and it's so absurd that it feels like the commander almost has to laugh. She then immediately speaks over comms to Thancred and the others who were just finishing up rescuing Alice and Alphino from their cell, and tells Iulus to go back to Quintus and tell him they'll agree to actual negotiations, but not this desperate and pathetic attempt. Instead, Iulus says they had a plan B, in case the invaders refused to leave for the sake of the hostages.
Ambush!
This attack feels like a suicide attack. The Magitech armor is a threat, but at worst it would cause the Eorzean forces a few men before being taken down, and the soldiers attempting to rush the camp are sick, half-dead men. The Eorzean forces are fresh, warm, and well-fed. This is what the fuel you scavenged was used for. Instead of keeping the people seeking shelter with the First Legion warm, a desperate gambit from Quintus, a leader who has been utterly defeated, and is now throwing away the lives of men out of stubborn refusal to admit his own defeat. The Eorzean forces begin to defend themselves, before Arun Senna, one of the white mages from Gridania, casts a spell creating a barrier of wind between the two forces.
This child may be the worst emissary I have ever seen.
We received an urgent communication from the Grand Company of Eorzea. Envoys from the Imperial Army, led by members of the 10th Legion, came to Alamigo and requested an audience. They explained that their efforts to coordinate the reclamation of the capital with the aid of the 4th, 5th, 8th, and 12th had ended in failure. Communication between most legions has broken down entirely. Most of the 10th's conscripts have deserted, leaving their forces severely depleted. That is why, unable to continue the fight on their own, they and their allies turned to the Grand Company of Eorzea for aid.
Lies! Every word!
It is the truth, and I have not finished. The 10th has requested that we deliver a message to Lord Quintus. Have the ill stand down.
When Quintus hears this, he grimly realizes the reality of the situation. He finally tells his men to accept the Eorzean's terms, before dismissing his men, saying he wants to be alone. The Garlean Empire has collapsed. There is no more Garlemald. At least, not the Garlemald Quintus believed in. Not the Garlemald Quintus served.
I take solace, your radiance, in the knowledge you are not here to witness our debasement. 'Twas a grand, glorious dream we shared. Of a world united, of peace and prosperity. We are ghosts, you and I, memories of days gone by. Bonds forged in blood that I will not see tarnished.
Quickly! We have to reach the station before it's too late.
If there is still a chance that Quintus will agree to a truce, we must take it.
I just hope we get there before he and his men do something rash.
This would be a strong ending to Garlemald's story on its own, albeit a bleak one. Garlemald is no more. The empire that had been the most prominent antagonists of the game for a real-life decade, and in universe for far longer, has fallen. The last remaining true believer of the empire is dead, and the people of Garlemald have to find their own way forward without the nation that they've always taken as eternal to guide them. But there's still that last remaining thread, Emperor Varus, the voice of the dead Emperor Varus on the radio. Several survivors have now told you the same thing. that they've heard the voice of Emperor Varus coming from beyond the grave. First, though, you help the remaining survivors at Tertium to Camp Broken Glass. You decide to take a long rest with some sense of victory. Though the Telophoroi aren't dealt with, though the story is far from over, it feels like this is a step forward. Not everyone at Tertium trusts you, but some do. You even get to say Euless in Camp Broken Glass, and though there's still mistrust before these former enemies, he's even offered a drink before long.
Here. At ease, man. There's nothing funny in it. I'm from Alamigo, but was a conscript until recently. Used to eat this with the officers.
Apparently, it's adapted from a steppe recipe. This is my first time trying it, and I have to say, it's not half bad.
A Garlean soldier, drinking a recipe from the steppe region of Doma, offered by an Alamigan who used to be a conscript. Alongside soldiers from Gridania, Ul'dah, Ishgard, Bosja, and many others.
It's the little things that make life worth living, don't you think?
It's a genuinely nice moment, which is unfortunately cut short. The Telophoroi's massive tower unleashes another wave of tempering across Garlemald, as Emperor Varus's voice can be heard speaking over the radio.
On behalf of the Garlean Empire, thank you for inviting me today.
What? Emperor Varus?
Though the Eorzean forces are protected from it, the Garleans they've just brought into the camp are not, and begin to turn. The camp quickly tries to safely capture the Garleans and save them from the tempering, as Fandaniel slips into Camp Broken Glass and kidnaps you out of it. What follows is a very silly and highly enjoyable cutscene where you find yourself having dinner with Xenos, with Fandaniel dressed as a butler serving the two of you. Also, you've had your soul pulled out of your own body and placed in the body of a random Garlean soldier as a part of a plan that, honestly, I'm not going to go into it right now. Maybe I'll save that for that Xenos video I threatened to do earlier.
Come now. To us Ascians, it is no different from trying on new clothes. Why not make the most of it by partaking in this fine cuisine?
What I do want to talk about here is the specifics revealed about what lies in the Telophoroi's massive tower, the Tower of Babel. There's a primal inside of this tower, tempering the people of Garlemald. But primals aren't some naturally occurring phenomenon. They require belief. Belief in the world of Final Fantasy XIV has power. Garlemald's state religion was atheism, in order to prevent these primals, these icons, from being summoned. No gods to worship, no risk of summoning, that's the idea. But as anyone who's ever read American Gods knows, people don't necessarily need gods to find objects of worship. Or, as Fandaniel put it,
but people being people must turn to something or someone in their hour of need. Who then? Why, His Radiance the Emperor, of course. As you have observed firsthand, Garlemald has seen better days. The legendary Solus Zosgalvus, dead. Provinces near and far in open rebellion. Our bold new emperor assassinated. And that last one even sparked a civil war. What rotten luck. The people cried out for salvation. Their earnest pleas, one might even call them prayers, a supplication united for the Empire to reclaim her former glory. And so their will did manifest, channeled through the corpse of none other than Emperor Varus himself.
Their voices cried out in prayer, not to a god, but to their emperor. Every empire is built upon belief. Some are built upon religious beliefs. Some are built upon nationalism, belief in the state. But sometimes they're built upon belief in a person, a president, a king, an emperor. Sometimes that sort of belief can turn to worship. And if you aren't careful, that worship can create a monster.
And lo, the Savior was born, the embodiment of the Garlean spirit, their anima.
The people of Garlemald cried out in prayer for their lost emperor to save them from civil war, from the collapse of their empire. Those prayers were heard, and the body of Emperor Varus was reanimated, brought back, and twisted into anima, a powerful primal who calls out to the people of Garlemald and tells them that if Garlemald falls, so must the rest of the world. A belief that even Emperor Varus himself did not hold, a nihilism that Varus would have opposed, but which his son has come to believe in. It is this final obstacle you face in Garlemald, to charge the Tower of Babel and put down this final remnant of a dead empire. The shambling corpse of a corrupt ruler, the manifestation of belief in a nation which has run its course. Garlemald is not a good nation. Garlemald as it existed was not a place worth saving. Isolationist, paranoid, fascistic, cruel. Garlemald was built from the ground up on toxic ideologies by corrupt and self-interested leaders. The people of Garlemald were worth saving, though. Some of them proved too far gone, like Quintus, who chose death when faced with his own nation's fallibility. But some of them chose a better path, like Gaius, who had a crisis of faith in his homeland and came out the other end a better person. Or Iulus, who made mistakes because of his wholehearted belief in the state that he can never fix or take back, but which he can still move forward from. So even though it might seem like a sudden change in direction to go from the personal and political drama of Quintus and Iulus to the catastrophic threat of Anima, I don't think there's a better way this story, the story of Garlemald, could have ended than marching into the enemy stronghold and killing the literal manifestation of Garlemald's toxic and nationalistic ideology. Because Final Fantasy XIV is a game about belief. Some beliefs need to be called out. Some beliefs that hurt others, need to be killed. So, how do we know which beliefs those are? Quintus knew his values were right. He knew in his heart that he was making right and just decisions. It's not that he had no moral compass, it's that his moral compass was pointing to a different north from mine or from Alice's. Varus knew his values were right, that the future he was building for his people would all be worth it. Even Gaius knew what he was doing for Garlemald was right, until he suddenly realized that it never had been. The nameless men and women who died for Garlemald, the red link in Garlemald's chain, died for a nation they loved, a nation they believed was just. So why did these people have moral compasses pointing in directions that, from the outside, seem so obviously wrong? How do we know that our own moral compasses are pointing in the right direction? As silly as it might sound, is there something we can take from this story and make a part of us? Something that might make us just a little bit stronger ourselves? Or, in other words, where do our ideals come from? Why do we believe the things we believe in? When Alice and Alphino are being held prisoner by the First Legion, and things are looking grim, there's a conversation between the two of them, where they talk about what they've come to believe, what they fight for, and the falling out which they had with their father over political differences, as he was a firm non-interventionist, and they believed so strongly in building an ideal world that they left their home of Old Charlian to help solve the problems they saw plaguing the world. These are two characters who have grown immeasurably, and made plenty of mistakes along the way over the course of a real-time decade. From two young college graduates who knew they were the only ones who knew how to save the world, if only the world would listen to them, to much wiser and more realistic, but still idealistic, people. The conversation goes like this.
I've been thinking about what Quintus said, about why no one would accept Garlean rule. Irreconcilable differences. When coexistence isn't an option, only conquest remains. Varys at Gimlet said much the same. Only by uniting the world beneath a single standard would we rid ourselves of the Ascians. United as one people, one race cleansed of imperfections. A cold and unforgiving vision. And when we fail to live up to their standards, what place is there for us in their world? But the truly sad, truly frustrating thing is how damnably similar it all is to the lofty ideals of Father and the Forum. Non-intervention. Always non-intervention. Protect our knowledge and our people, and to hells with the rest of you. And yet, I can see how it happened. Varys and Father looked to their elders for guidance and took their virtues as their own. But for this world was of their making. In who else could they place their trust? All of us lost in a sea of chaos, searching desperately for purpose and meaning. But it shouldn't just be an extension of another's. It has to be ours. It has to be. We all have a stake in this world. No one should be silenced.
I won't deny that we lack the experience of people such as Father or Quintus. Perhaps they've come to see the world as a series of problems, and the most efficient way of solving them, to reduce everything to fundamental forms. A stone is a stone, a cloud, a flower, no more than that. Simple descriptions that strip the subject of distinguishing characteristics. A man is a man, divided according to race, creed, or allegiance, and to some, defined by such associations.
Is that what you think?
In my misbegotten youth. But what I believed wisdom was no more than aggressive ignorance. I've since learned to look beyond the banners and the politics, to see people as individuals with their own hopes and dreams. As for my dream of building a better world, well, every day I'm reminded that it is far more complex than I had ever imagined. But it only spurs me onward, to find the wisdom and the strength to see it through to the very end.
All of us lost in a sea of chaos, searching desperately for purpose and meaning. But it shouldn't just be an extension of another's. It has to be ours. It has to be. It has to be ours. Our ideals, our beliefs, they have to be ours. Genuinely held, genuinely considered and interrogated, and believed. Not just because someone else told us to believe in something, but because we have looked inward on ourselves and come out stronger, knowing who we are. So where do we get our beliefs? Do they come from our parents? From our schools? Do they come from our friends, or from our leaders, or from the state? They need to come from none of these things, and they need to come from all of these things. Now more than ever, it's up to each and every one of us, individually, to look at the things we've been taught by those around us, our friends, our families, our teachers, our mentors, and examine why we hold those values, which of those values to keep, and which of those values to leave behind as relics of our past. Where do our ideals come from? They come from us.